Have you ever wondered what could be more creepy than abandoned houses? The answer is creepy abandoned ghost towns. Hello, my dear friends, Mr. Top F is with you today, and it is about ghost towns I will tell you about in my today's video. The release is divided into two parts, so before we start, make sure you subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the second part of today's release. Also like this video if you enjoy the content I make. Get ready for the horror, we're about to start. Craco, Italy. When the cicadas fall asleep and the sun hides behind the rusty hills, it becomes really scary here. It seems that through the shadows cast by time-torn, dilapidated houses, other shadows glide darker, deeper, more gloomy. They rush somewhere along the squared line with white stones, flow along the narrow serpentine streets and disappear into the abyss. Here and there is a rustle, mice, or someone else, and here, a knock, as if a stone had collapsed. And from the black hole in the old church, from where heavy oak doors with bronze handles once hung, a horned head peeps out. Is it the devil, or is it a lost goat? It's a bad place. Evil spirits are dancing round dances there. Gray-haired old woman gossip in the market of Matera, sparkling with black eyes. No wonder there are no more people there. Not a soul. Craco is located 50 kilometers from Matera, one of the centers of the Basilicata region in southern Italy. Ghost town on a 400-meter mountain. No one lives in the old houses, no one walks the streets, and the churches have not smelled of incense for a long time. A few decades ago, the inhabitants left Craco and moved to a neighboring village down the river. However, the reason for the mass departure was by no means the round dances of evil spirits. In 1963, a powerful landslide occurred in the city on the mountain. Journalists wrote that almost the whole Craco went underground, although journalists, as often happened, exaggerated. Several houses and part of the town square collapsed. Luckily, no one died. Nevertheless, the authorities decided that the city was no longer fit for life and announced all residents must move out. Not everyone moved out. Someone held on to the last and left the city only in 1980, when the south of Italy reeled from a powerful earthquake with hundreds of casualties. These tremors, and the epicenter of the earthquake was in Basilicata, became a control shot in the head of Craco. There were no more people here. Only mice, feral dogs, and lost goats. City on the mountain. The first settlement on the mountain, where Craco subsequently grew up, appeared during the Great Greek colonization in the middle of the 6th century BC. Settlers from Hellas, or rather, from the neighboring Greek colony of Metapont, built a fortification, fleeing either from malaria that raged on the plain or from the warlike Lucans, a tribe that kept all of southern Italy in fear and that beat the Romans themselves more than once. No wonder they were nicknamed Italian Spartans for their valor. Subsequently, however, the descendants of Romulus put things in order here. The Greeks, Lucans, as well as their neighbors, the Bredians and Samnites, reluctantly had to recognize the authority of Rome. Craco then, in Roman and then Byzantine times, was, apparently, a seedy and unremarkable village that did not leave a trace in historical chronicles. Life changed when, in the 11th century, warriors from Normandy, dressed in iron chain mail, landed in southern Italy. The Byzantines, and at that time a significant part of the south of the Apennine Peninsula belonged to Constantinople, stubbornly resisted, inflicted several heavy defeats on the Normans, but in the end, were forced to leave Italy. The last Roman city in the Apennines, Bari, surrendered in 1071. The population here remained Greek-speaking for a long time, but barons with northern French roots ruled in Puglia, Calabria, and Basilicata. One of them turned Craco from a village into a fortress. Around 1040, a powerful castle was built on the mountain, which was crowned with a rectangular tower with small loopholes and 2-meter walls. And Craco begins to acquire his signature silhouette that has survived to this day. Unfortunately, we do not know the names of the first owners of the castle. At the end of the 11th century, the castle, along with the surrounding lands, belonged to Archbishop Ronaldo di Tricarico. At the beginning of the next century, Craco captures the army of the Duke of Apulia, Roger II, the grandson of the legendary Robert Guiscard from the Hauteville dynasty, following to the east. And a little later, the Norman Baron Eberto, who managed the estate, according to the list of barons, from 1154 to 1168, is mentioned as the owner of Craco. It was at this time that Craco becomes more than a castle. The citadel begins to grow into residential buildings and other stone buildings. The importance of Craco grows in the 13th century under the German Emperor Frederick II of Hohenstaufen, who at that time owned southern Italy. It turns the castle and the town adjoining it into an important military and commercial center, controlling communications along two rivers flowing from both sides of Craco. The people are getting richer, the city is expanding, spreading over the mountain. In the 15th century, at the height of the Renaissance, the heyday comes in Craco. Churches with beautiful frescoes are being built in the city, not far from the castle and the main square, and 4 palaces built by the local rich grow one after another: Palazzo Grosso, Palazzo Marana, Palazzo Carbone, and Palazzo Simonetti. The titles of local aristocrats also speak of the importance of Craco in those days. First, the marquises of Craco appear, and then the dukes. At the beginning of the 19th century, the south of Italy was devoured by a sluggish, but rather bloody war between the supporters of Napoleon and the Spanish, or rather, Neapolitan Bourbons. At the same time, hostilities are conducted more often not with the help of regular troops, but with motley gangs. The robbers are not averse to plundering Craco as well. Here appear with their thugs such well-known personalities in narrow circles as Domenico Taccone, nicknamed Heel, Nicola Abalsamo, nicknamed Loaf, and Gerardo Voda, whom everyone called Escarole, that is, lettuce, for curly hair, and he was not offended. Later, in the middle of the century before last, Craco was honored by an entire band of robbers, commanded by Carmine Craco. Sometimes this man is called almost a hero of Italy, Robin Hood, who fought against the rich for the rights of the poor, but the inhabitants of Craco, watching in 1861 how their houses were robbed, considered him an ordinary bandit and very bloodthirsty. New life. In the following decades, Craco's life was not marked by bright events. Southern Italy is a depressing place, and Craco was by no means the most cheerful city in this depressive space. The incomes of residents were low, the Industrial Revolution bypassed Basilicata and neighboring regions, and from the end of the 19th century, mass migration of Italians to North America began. Everything went smoothly until 1963, when there was a historical landslide that put an end to Craco. Previously, they thought that it was caused by an earthquake, but now the opinion has been established that human activity is to blame for everything. They say that the inside of the main mountain was greatly disturbed by water pipes and sewer tunnels, and it could not stand it, and this caused the landslide. The population of the city at that time was about 2,000 people, and after the landslide, the majority decided to leave their native walls. They moved to the lowland village of Craco Peschiera. This was the first exodus. The second happened 9 years later when a new natural disaster hit Craco, a flood. And the 1980 earthquake forced the most persistent patriots of their native place to leave their homes. Craco is extinct, but not dead, because the ghost town began to be used as scenery in the creation of films and TV shows. Over the past 60 years, about 24 films have been shot here, the most famous being Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. But Craco did not live only by art. Sometimes the deserted city flashed in the local criminal reports, reporting on the next dark and terrible deeds of the local mafia group, the Basilischi. In the 1980s, seismic activity sensors were installed in the city, which were supposed to show what was happening and whether it was worth expecting the city to completely fall underground. But no, over the past decades, sensors have shown there is no need to worry, the earth is sleeping and everything is stable. Perhaps that is why at one fine moment Craco was opened for tourists. Enthusiasts could get into an abandoned city before, however, they did it at their peril and risk. Now you can book an official tour at the tourist office, opened at the municipality. They will bring you to the mountain, make you put on a yellow helmet, lead you through the streets, and tell you all the most interesting things. Alas, they are not allowed inside the buildings, it is dangerous. Although you can enter the Norman Tower, the most ancient building of Craco, which saw Duke Roger, Baron Alberto, and Archbishop Ronaldo, you can enter. In 2011 it was restored. At the same time, by the way, Craco was included in the list of the World Monuments Fund, WMF. This spurred the development of tourism. There were more guests. Everything is different at night. There are very dark and deep shadows, and strange noises. And in the Norman Tower, as the old women from Matera say, and they know something, the ghosts of the formidable conquerors from the north, who once upon a time built a majestic castle on the mountain, are hiding. Oradour-sur-Glane, France. The tragedy of Lidice, a mining village in the Czech Republic, is well known all over the world. Residents were accused of harboring underground fighters who killed the protector of Bohemia and Moravia, Reinhard Heydrich. On June 10, 1942, by order of SS Gruppenführer Karl Hermann Frank, head of the SS and police in Prague, the entire male population of Lidice over 15 years old, 172 people, was shot. 195 women were sent to the Ravensbrück concentration camp. Of the 98 children, 13 were left under the age of 1 year and fit for Germanization. The rest of the children were killed in the gas chamber at the death camp near Chelmno. The village in question survived its own Lidice. On the way to Normandy, Oradour-sur-Glane is a village located in the department of Haute-Vienne. During the years of German occupation, French resistance units were quite active in these places. The name of the city comes from the Latin word oratorium, chapel. It is believed that this is because, in the Roman era, there was a funeral chapel since the dead were then buried along the road or at the crossroads. On June 6, 1944, the Allied landings took place in Normandy. In this regard, the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, which was in France on rest and resupply, was ordered to go north to help stop the advance of the Anglo-American forces. The division included the 4th SS Panzergrenadier Regiment under the command of SS Standartenführer Sylvester Stadler. In the days when the described events took place, Stadler handed over the affairs to a new commander, Otto Weidinger. The 1st Battalion of the regiment was also commanded by SS Sturmbannführer Adolf Diekmann, who played a key role in subsequent events. Captured Sturmbannführer. On June 9, 1944, SS Sturmbannführer Helmut Kempfy was captured by the French partisans, who were called the Maquis of Limousin. Collaborators from the militia formations of the so-called Vichy regime reported this to Adolf Diekmann. Diekmann reported this to Weidinger and Stadler, and from the latter, he received an order to recruit 30 hostages from among the residents, who were supposed to be exchanged for a captured German. There are many versions of what happened next. According to one of them, Oradour-sur-Glane came to the attention of the Germans by mistake. Kempfy was not kept there, but in the village of Oradour-sur-Vers. It is authentically known that the SS Sturmbannführer was shot by partisans. Upon learning of this, Diekmann decided to carry out a punitive action. They spared no one. It happened on June 10, 1944, exactly on the 2nd anniversary of the massacre of the inhabitants of Lidice. The SS blocked Oradour-sur-Glane and began to herd people to the main square under the pretext of checking documents. Then the women and children were locked up in the church, and the men were taken to the barns and sheds, in front of which machine guns were installed. The SS men, having opened fire, shot mainly at the legs. When the wounded men lost the ability to move, they were doused with fuel and burned alive. In the church, where there were women and children, the Nazis used an incendiary device. The unfortunate people screamed in horror and tried to get out through the windows, but they were shot by machine guns. 47-year-old Marguerite Roufanche was the only one who managed to escape. The wounded woman managed to get to the pea thickets, where she hid for many hours. The next day, she was found and rescued by the resistance fighters. Having dealt with the inhabitants, the SS men began to burn and blow up houses. In total, 190 men, 247 women, and 205 children were killed as a result of the punitive action. A few days later, the French were allowed to bury the dead. Sturmführer Diekmann stated that his actions were an act of retaliation for the attacks on the Germans carried out by the French partisans. Memory and judgment. The German command was somewhat shocked by the massacre in Oradour-sur-Glane. It is one thing to kill Russians, Poles, Yugoslavs, and quite another the French, whom Hitler did not classify as inferior peoples. And not just to kill, but in hundreds and with particular cruelty. Concerning Adolf Diekmann, the German command even launched an investigation, but it was discontinued since the Sturmführer soon died. In November 1944, the Provisional Government of France, at the suggestion of General de Gaulle, decided not to restore Oradour-sur-Glane, leaving it as a place of memory for the atrocities committed by the Nazis during the years of occupation. In 1953, a court in Bordeaux began to consider the case of the massacre of the inhabitants of Oradour-sur-Glane. Of the 200 SS men who participated in the massacre, only 65 survived to this point. 21 people appeared directly before the court. The rest managed to escape. Many of them were on the territory of the GDR. Forgiveness for the sake of reconciliation. Another difficulty was that out of the 21 defendants, 14 were so-called Malgreniers. We are talking about the inhabitants of Alsace and Lorraine, territories that, after the defeat of France in 1940, were declared German. Alsatians were recruited into the SS as German volunteers, but they claimed that they were forced into the ranks of the SS. During the proceedings, it was established that 13 Alsatians who participated in the punitive action in Oradour-sur-Glane were indeed called up by force, but one was still a volunteer. As a result, one German citizen and one Alsatian volunteer who personally participated in the process were sentenced to death. SS men who did not participate in the trial were also sentenced to death in absentia. 13 Alsatians forced for the massacre were given 6 to 7 years of forced labor. In Alsace, however, even such a verdict was considered cruel. Therefore, the French Parliament, in the name of reconciliation and in accordance with the supreme interests of national unity, cancelled the death sentences for the Alsatians, and with him for all Germans. Later, convicts sentenced to forced labor were amnestied. The Germans, whose death sentences were commuted to imprisonment, were released in 1958. Stasi against SS, Obersturmführer Barth punishment. Among the suicide bombers in absentia was the commander of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Reich, SS Brigadeführer Heinz Lammerding. Many historians believe that it was he who came up with the idea of punitive action in Oradour-sur-Glane, and Adolf Diekmann was only a performer. Lammerding avoided extradition to France, became a successful businessman in the FRG, and died in 1971 at the age of 65. Sometimes one can come across the assertion that the GDR authorities deliberately did not extradite the participants in the murder in Oradour-sur-Glane. This is not true. The secret services of East Germany were searching for Nazi criminals hiding under false names. In July 1981, Stasi agents detained the former SS Obersturmführer Heinz Barth, who had been posing as a model citizen of socialist Germany for many years. As it turned out, Barth participated not only in the massacre of the inhabitants of Oradour-sur-Glane, but also in punitive actions in the Czech Republic. On June 7, 1983, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for his crimes. Heinz Barth was released after the reunification of Germany in 1997. He was released for health reasons. In the wild, the Punisher lived for another decade, dying at the age of 86. End of the first part. That's all for today, my dear friends. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so as not to miss the second part of this video. Mr. Top F was with you. Bye.